Stop waiting for your life to change. Here's what nobody tells you. You're not someone who just watches things happen. You're the one creating what shows up, right now, in this exact moment. Most people spend years observing their struggles, understanding their patterns, getting really good at watching their own life, like it's a movie they can't control. But here's the thing, watching keeps you stuck in the same loop. When you shift from observing what is to creating what could be, everything moves. This isn't magical thinking. This is how your consciousness actually works, at the quantum level. You're about to understand why you felt stuck, and more importantly, what to do about it. Your awareness isn't just witnessing reality, it's determining which version of reality shows up.
Right at this moment, while you're taking in these words, notice what's actually going on inside your body. There's this quiet knowing happening, right? A sense that goes way beyond just thinking about concepts. That's not your brain processing information. That's your awareness waking up to something it's always understood, but couldn't quite put into words until now. The trap of just watching. Your whole life, you've basically been trained to be someone who just watches stuff happen. Watch the news cycle. Pay attention to what's trending. See what everyone else is up to. React when things happen around you. Respond based on whatever's going on. This conditioning runs so deep, is so woven into every single part of how we live today, that you probably don't even catch yourself doing it anymore. You look at your bank balance and immediately feel worried or relieved. You check in on your relationships and feel either good about them or let down. You look at your body and feel either confident or not enough. You scan for opportunities and feel either hopeful or like nothing's working out. Every single time, you're watching something that seems to exist on its own, completely separate from you. Something you just have to accept, deal with, or somehow work around. But here's the thing nobody mentions in therapy sessions, personal growth books, or even spiritual circles. When you just watch without actively creating, that's exactly what keeps you stuck in the same loops over and over. Each time you observe without creating something new, you're actually making that exact reality stronger. This isn't some magical thinking. This is literally how your awareness connects with what shows up in your life at the deepest level possible. When you watch your life happen from this detached spot, you're unconsciously picking that same exact reality pattern from an endless field of what could be possible. You're basically sending a signal to the universe saying, yeah, this is what I'm choosing to experience. Let's say you think about how your mornings go. You open your eyes, and within seconds, your mind starts scanning everything. You grab your phone. You check how you're feeling. You think about everything on your to-do list today. You remember yesterday's stress. In those first moments, you're not generating anything fresh. You're just observing what's already there and unconsciously saying yes to continuing it. This is exactly why making changes feels impossibly hard. You're not actually trying to generate something new. You're trying to watch yourself into a different life, which is like staring at a movie so hard that you think the story will change. No amount of watching will shift what's already been created. Most people spend their entire existence getting really good at observing. They become masters at spotting what's wrong, recognizing patterns, breaking down problems, understanding their own blocks. They build these really complex mental frameworks for understanding why they are the way they are. They can tell you in incredible detail how their childhood created them, how their current situation limits them, how their biology sets them up for certain results. And all of this watching, this analyzing, this deep understanding keeps them locked in the exact same place, perfectly stuck, the actual science behind creating with your consciousness. In quantum physics, there's this principle that most people get completely wrong, the observer effect. The popular version says that watching something creates reality, but that's not quite it. What really happens is way more subtle and incredibly more powerful. Particles hang out in this state called superposition, where they're holding multiple possibilities at the same time. They're not in one spot or another. They're basically a cloud of potential locations all happening at once. The second observation happens. This cloud of possibilities collapses down into one specific reality. But here's the game-changing part that shifts everything. The kind of observation you do determines which possibility actually becomes real. Dr. Dean Radin, at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, ran experiments that showed focused intention, not just passive watching, influences quantum systems in ways you can actually measure. When people just watched random number generators do their thing, nothing shifted. But when they held clear intention while watching, the random outputs started showing statistical patterns that shouldn't exist based on how probability is supposed to work. The gap between just passively watching and actually creating with intention is the gap between watching your life play out and actively generating what happens. Your consciousness right at this moment is like a quantum system. You're existing in a superposition of endless possible versions of yourself. Every moment is offering countless potential paths, outcomes, and experiences. But most people collapse into that same possibility again and again because they observe out of habit instead of creating from intention. Brain science shows us something equally mind-blowing. Your brain literally can't tell the difference between actual experiences and experiences you vividly imagine. Dr. Alvaro Pascual Leone's research at Harvard proved that people who mentally practiced piano exercises grew the exact same brain changes as people who physically practiced. The neurons fired in identical patterns, whether the experience was physically real or just imagined. This means your brain is constantly getting shaped by whatever you put your attention on, whether that's observing your current reality or creating your intended reality. Every time you observe your limitations, your brain makes those neural pathways stronger, making those limitations more solid and real. Every time you create from possibility, you build fresh pathways that make those possibilities actually accessible. The question isn't whether you're creating your reality. You already are, always. The question is whether you're creating on purpose or by accident, deliberately or just by default, as someone actively creating or as someone passively watching who keeps recreating the same exact patterns. Moving from watching to creating. 3 years back, I figured out this distinction in the most painful way you can imagine. My life had turned into this highlight reel of repeated failures. Same relationship patterns with different people showing up. Same money struggles even with different jobs. Same health problems even with different treatments. I had spent years watching these patterns, analyzing them, understanding them, talking about them in therapy, writing about them in journals, trying to figure out why I kept going through them. I was a total expert observer of my own life, and that expertise was the exact thing keeping me trapped. The breakthrough happened during a moment of complete exhaustion. I was sitting in my apartment staring at another rejection letter, feeling that same familiar wave of disappointment when something inside me just stopped, not gave up. That would mean defeat. This was different. It felt like a mechanism that had been running my entire life suddenly clicked off. In that quiet, I noticed something I'd never seen before. I was watching my life happen. I was observing my emotions, my thoughts, my circumstances, like they were a movie I had zero control over. I was the person in the audience who kept showing up to watch the same film, complaining about the story, but never realizing I could just walk out of the theater completely. That's when I asked myself a question that changed absolutely everything. What if I stopped observing what is and started creating what could be? Not positive thinking, not visualization, not repeating affirmations. Something way deeper. What if I stopped relating to my life as something that happens to me and started relating to it as something that happens through me? I didn't try to change my circumstances. I didn't make a vision board or set new goals. Instead, I did something that felt almost rebellious. I stopped checking. I stopped observing whether things were getting better or worse. I stopped tracking my progress. I stopped evaluating my situation. And in that space where observation used to live, I started creating. Not creating like making things happen through effort and force, Creating like holding a frequency of what I intended to experience, no matter what current reality was showing me. Creating like being the person who already had what I wanted, not the person trying to get it. The shift was so subtle that I almost missed it at first, but within days, things that had been stuck for years started moving. Not because I was doing anything different on the outside, but because I had completely changed my relationship with reality itself. Someone I hadn't talked to in 3 years reached out with an opportunity that perfectly matched what I'd been intending to create. A health issue that had stuck around despite multiple treatments suddenly cleared up. A creative project that had been blocked for months poured out of me in a single weekend. But the most shocking change was what happened inside. The person who watches sees current conditions. The person who creates sees infinite possibility. The person who watches asks, "What is real?" The person who creates asks, "What wants to become real through me?" This distinction might sound philosophical, but it has immediate practical applications that will transform every single area of your life. In the comments, drop one word that captures the energy you're choosing to carry forward. Maybe it's alignment, maybe it's ease, maybe it's power, maybe it's something uniquely yours. Let that word be a small but profound declaration, a signal like a quantum seed you plant, not just in this space, but in the quantum field. In relationships, people who watch notice what their partner does or doesn't do and react based on that. They observe communication patterns. They spot problems. They analyze dynamics. People who create generate the quality of connection they intend to experience, regardless of current patterns. They don't wait for the relationship to get better so they can feel loving. They embody loving presence and let the relationship reorganize around that frequency. In career and money, people who watch monitor their bank account, track opportunities, check market conditions, and make decisions based on current reality. People who create hold clear intention for the value they provide and the abundance they experience. And they take inspired action from that frequency instead of reactive action from scarcity. In health, people who watch monitor symptoms, track progress, and adjust behaviors based on how their body responds. People who create embody the vitality they intend to experience and let their body's intelligence reorganize around that state. The difference is subtle, but creates radically different results. People who watch are always one step behind reality, reacting to what already is. People who create are one step ahead of reality, generating what wants to become. Before we move forward, I want to invite you into something real. If you've been feeling like something's making sense, and if a part of you is realizing your own power, tap like if you just had an aha moment, because like attracts like, and subscribe. Stay with this space. Grow with us. The recognition that changes absolutely everything. Right now, something is waking up in your consciousness. You can feel it, can't you? Not a thought or an emotion, but something deeper. A recognition that you've been operating as someone who watches way more than you realized. A sense that there's a completely different way to connect with reality that you've glimpsed but never fully lived in. This recognition is the beginning of the shift. But recognition by itself isn't enough. The watching state is deeply habitual. You've been trained in it for decades through education systems that taught you to memorize and repeat instead of create and innovate. Through media that trained you to consume and react instead of generate and initiate. Through social conditioning that rewarded fitting in and punished standing out. Breaking free from the watching state takes more than understanding. It takes practice, repetition, and a willingness to feel uncomfortable as you learn to operate in a completely new way. Here's what you need to understand. You don't become someone who creates by learning new techniques or getting new information. You become someone who creates by recognizing that creation is your natural state and observation is the learned habit you need to unlearn. Operating at this level, you've developed the ability to watch your own watching. You can observe your thoughts, notice your patterns, recognize your reactions. You've created some space between what happens and how you respond. This is a significant evolution from level 1. You're no longer completely merged with your reactions. You can see your conditioning. You understand that your thoughts aren't necessarily true, that your emotions are temporary, that your patterns were learned and can potentially be changed. But here's the trap. Most people think this is the finish line. They become professional watchers of their own consciousness. They can describe in elaborate detail how their mind works, what their triggers are, why they respond the way they do. They've developed sophisticated frameworks for understanding themselves, and they stay stuck in the same patterns, just with more awareness of why they're stuck. This is because observation, even self-observation, even awareness of your own awareness, is still fundamentally the watching position. You're watching consciousness operate, but you're not yet consciously creating with it. Level 3. Creative consciousness. This is where everything transforms. At this level, you recognize that you're not the observer of consciousness, or even the consciousness being observed. You're the creative force that generates both the observer and the observed. This isn't a state you achieve through practice. It's a recognition that shifts your entire relationship with existence. You stop asking, "What is my life showing me?" and start asking, "What wants to be created through me?" At this level, you don't observe your reality and try to improve it. You generate new possibilities from a space that exists before observation occurs. You don't analyze your patterns and try to change them. You embody frequencies that make old patterns irrelevant. The shift to level 3 consciousness isn't gradual. It's instant. Even though the recognition is sudden, you'll have moments of operating as someone who creates, generating new possibilities, feeling that flow state where life moves through you instead of happening to you. Then you'll slip back into watching mode, analyzing what happened, checking whether it's working, tracking your progress. This back and forth is natural. Don't make it mean anything about whether you're doing it right. Simply notice when you've slipped into watching mode and consciously shift back to creating mode. Every time you make that shift, it gets easier, more natural, more automatic. Think of it like learning to ride a bicycle. At first, you fall constantly. You can't maintain balance for more than a few seconds. But you don't conclude that bicycles are impossible or that you're fundamentally incapable of riding. You keep practicing, keep adjusting, keep finding your balance. And eventually it becomes so natural that you don't even think about expenses that showed up or income that didn't come through as expected, or you're staring at your bank account feeling that familiar worry about money. The person who watches responds. You look at your bank account and observe the number. You feel anxiety because the number is lower than you want it to be. You start thinking about all the bills you need to pay, all the things you can't afford, all the ways your life would be easier if you had more money. You might create a budget, look for ways to cut expenses, start applying for new jobs or extra work. All of this is driven by observation of current reality and reaction to what you observe. There's nothing wrong with practical action. But when it's driven purely from observation of limitation, it reinforces the frequency of limitation. You're operating from, "I don't have enough, so I need to fix this problem." That frequency of not having is what generates more experiences of not having. The person who creates responds. You notice the bank account number, but you don't identify with it as the truth about your financial reality. Instead, you ask, "What wants to be created here?" You tune into the frequency of abundance, not as something you lack, but as a natural state that wants to express through you. This doesn't mean ignoring practical reality or pretending money doesn't matter. It means consciously generating the frequency of abundance while taking whatever practical action feels aligned. You might still create a budget or look for new income streams, but the action comes from a completely different place. It's not desperate reaction to scarcity. It's inspired action from abundance consciousness. The difference is subtle in description but dramatic in results. When you operate as someone who watches, you're constantly responding to current conditions, which means current conditions determine your state. When you operate as someone who creates, you're generating your state regardless of conditions, which means your state begins to determine what conditions show up. This applies to every area of life. In relationships, you stop observing what your partner does or doesn't do and start creating the quality of connection you intend to experience. In health, you stop monitoring symptoms as evidence of your body's limitations and start embodying the vitality and determination to make something happen. When you're operating as someone who creates, you still take action, but it feels completely different. Instead of forcing and pushing, you're channeling and allowing. Instead of figuring everything out mentally, you're following intuitive hits that lead to perfect outcomes. In the comments, drop one thing that you deeply desire. Maybe it's money. Maybe it's happy relationship. Maybe it's healthy and fit body. Maybe it's something uniquely yours. Let this be a small but profound declaration. A signal to universe you send not just in this space but in quantum field. Emotional stability improves. People who watch experience emotional roller coasters because their state depends on external conditions. Something good happens, they feel good. Something challenging happens, they feel bad. Their emotional experience is constantly determined by observation of circumstances. People who create maintain emotional balance because their state isn't dependent on what they observe. They can acknowledge challenging circumstances without being emotionally hijacked by them. They can experience disappointments without collapsing into despair. They can face uncertainty without anxiety. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions or bypassing difficult experiences to become someone who creates. You're not just changing your personal reality. You're contributing to a collective shift that's occurring across the entire planet. Right now, millions of people are simultaneously recognizing that the watching position is a trap. They're discovering that they have way more creative capacity than they've been taught to believe. They're remembering that consciousness isn't something that happens in their head. It's the fundamental creative force that generates all experience. This isn't random. It's an evolutionary leap that happens periodically throughout human history. There are moments when collective consciousness reaches a threshold where new capacities become accessible. We're living in one of those moments right now. The shift from watching to creating isn't just personal development. It's species-wide transformation. And every person who makes this shift contributes to what researchers call morphic resonance, the phenomenon where patterns become easier to access once enough individuals have established them. This means your shift makes it easier for others to shift. Your embodiment of creator consciousness creates a template in the collective field that others can access more easily. You're not just transforming your own life. You're participating in the transformation of human consciousness itself. This is why you feel such urgency around these concepts. This is why this information found you at this exact moment. Your higher consciousness knows that now is when this shift is possible, necessary, and inevitable for those who are ready. The integration practice. I'm going to give you a simple practice that will anchor this shift from watching to creating into your daily experience. This isn't something you do once and forget. It's something you integrate into your way of being until it becomes automatic. Morning reset. The first few minutes after waking are crucial. This is when your consciousness either locks into watching mode for the day or establishes creating mode. Once you've integrated the basic shift from watching to creating, there's an even deeper level that becomes accessible. And this is where everything I've shared so far expands into something even more profound. At the deepest level, the distinction between watching and creating dissolves entirely. You recognize that consciousness doesn't observe reality or create reality. Consciousness is reality experiencing itself through infinite forms and perspectives. When you reach this level of understanding, you're no longer someone who creates trying to generate specific outcomes. You're the creative force itself expressing through the temporary form you call you. You're not creating your life from a position of separation. Your life is itself creating through the vehicle of your individual awareness. This isn't the goal you need to reach. It's the truth you recognize when you've released enough conditioning that your natural state becomes obvious. You don't become this. You remember that you've always been this and temporarily forgot. Send this to that one friend who really needs to hear this. You know the one. Real ones share value. Pass this on, if you're that kind of human. Your life, comfortable, familiar, known, and ultimately limiting. On the other side is creator consciousness, unknown, unpredictable, and infinitely more expansive than anything you've experienced so far. The threshold isn't something you cross through effort or force. It's something you cross through recognition. The moment you recognize that you're not the observer of your life, but the creative force generating the experience of life itself, the shift occurs automatically. That recognition might be happening right now as you read these words, or it might emerge over the coming days and weeks as these concepts settle into your consciousness and begin reorganizing how you interface with reality. Either way, the shift is inevitable once you've been exposed to this understanding. You can't unknow what you now know. You can't fully return to unconscious observation once you've glimpsed conscious creation. The question isn't whether you'll shift, but how consciously and deliberately you'll participate in the shift that's already occurring. In the comments below, I want you to write just 3 words. I am creating, not I will create, or I want to create. Present tense active voice. Because this isn't about becoming something you're not. It's about recognizing what you already are beneath all the conditioning that taught you to observe rather than create. When you make this declaration, you're not just commenting on a video. You're making a commitment to your own consciousness that you're ready to operate at a fundamentally different level. You're announcing to the field of infinite possibility that you recognize yourself not as someone who watches life, but as someone who creates life itself. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because everything shared here is designed to support your continued integration of creator consciousness. Each video builds on the previous ones, creating a progressive deepening of your capacity to operate as someone who consciously creates rather than unconsciously watches. The old paradigm taught you to observe reality, understand it, and adapt to it. The new paradigm recognizes that you're not adapting to reality. You're generating it through the quality of your consciousness, moment by moment. Welcome to Creator Consciousness. Welcome to the recognition that you've never been just someone who watches. You've always been the creative force itself, temporarily forgetting your true nature. The moment you stop being the observer, you become the creator.